Welcome to this episode of Best of America by Horseback. I'm Tom Seay with Kristen Biscoe. On this episode, we're going to take you back in time to 1716 to the original premier trail ride of America. Governor Spotswood went from Fort Germanna following the Rapidan River to the top of the mountains to claim all the land west for the King of England. Most school children in Virginia over the years have heard this story, the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe, and now people everywhere are going to know more about this historic trail ride.
To bring history to life, our riders rode in colonial period costume every day. The start of our ride began at Germanna Foundation Visitor Center along the river with a blessing and a ceremonial start. We also hosted a colonial picnic with the Museum of Culpeper History under the walnut trees of our 1700s colonial home, which is only a few miles from the original starting location.
Along the route, we'll stop at Hebron Lutheran Church, which was built by men who came over to the colonies as indentured servants to Alexander Spotswood. The concluding event was in the Shenandoah National Park on top of the Blue Ridge Mountains.
We had Virginia legislators who presented a proclamation passed by the government recognizing the significant historical event.
We had a representative of the British people, our own named His Excellency Gary Bass, who toasted all that gathered.
We also had representatives of the local historical societies and opened the event to the public as a free event to enjoy.
So sit back and relax and watch another episode of Best of America by Horseback as we bring history to life.
Part of this show is brought to you by Tucker Trail Saddles, the world's finest trail saddles and equipment company. By Mill Creek Manure Spreaders, clean stalls in half the time with half the work. By CSI Saddle Pads, designed for your horse's comfort and performance in mind. The difference is amazing. And by Spurs Big Fix, wound, skin, and hoof. The more you use it, the more you'll love it.
For more than 30 years, Tucker Saddles has dedicated themselves to the development, design, and manufacturing of trail saddles that provide the ultimate in comfort for both horse and rider. Tucker Trail Saddles are the standard in quality and style for trail riders throughout the world. Their saddle designs are constantly evolving around the wants and needs of the rider, like their new reinforced wood trees suitable for dragging a log or roping. When you need comfort in the saddle, a Tucker saddle is the answer. I've ridden thousands of miles all over this country. The saddle I choose is a Tucker saddle.
On this episode of Best of America by Horseback, we are celebrating the 300th anniversary of America's premier trail ride of the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. A little-known expedition in 1716 opened a path through the thought-to-be impassable Blue Ridge Mountains, which ultimately gave a beginning route to famous explorers Lewis and Clark, and started the western expansion of this country. Lieutenant Governor Alexander Spotswood, acting governor of Virginia, led an expedition of 50 men and 74 horses from his wilderness home in Germanna to the top of the Blue Ridge Mountains and beyond to claim all the lands to the west for King George I of England.
This day is a wonderful day in the history of this colony of Virginia. For these great lands, mostly unexplored, we set out now with this great expedition of men that we have assembled to proceed indeed to go over the great mountains of the Blue Ridge. It is our intention to go beyond the mountains, claim the lands indeed for His Majesty the King. It will indeed be an opportunity, for I have long thought myself that we should allow settlement indeed beyond these mountains and encourage indeed a settlement.
Governor Spotswood led his expedition out of the capital at Williamsburg on August 20th, 1716, and rode to his ironworks at Germanna, where the group was to be joined by 2 companies of rangers. They were joined en route by several gentlemen, 14 rangers, and 4 Meherrin Indians. Tom Seay and Kristen Biscoe invited a handful of riders to join them for a week to retrace the route of this historic expedition. They began at Germanna's Visitor Center, which is on the grounds of the original Fort Germanna and Spotswood's wilderness home known as the Enchanted Castle.
Alexander Spotswood set up a fort out on the wilderness to protect the northern boundaries. 1714, he built a 5-sided wooden walled fort out on the frontiers. And he settled it with German families Protestant families that had come from Siegen in Germany, made their way to London, and then from London here to the Virginia colonies to find themselves put out on the frontier. To help pay for their voyage, they needed to work 4 more years and did that service here at Fort Germanna, as it came to be called. Until one day in August of 1716, a couple of gentlemen came out of the woods wearing wigs and fancy regalia. One of them was Governor Spotswood, the other one was John Fontaine, and I'm sure there were a few others along the way to kind of help them with all their things and baggage. For 5 days, the expedition sort of grouped itself around Fort Germanna and used that time to sort of set up preparations for their big step into the wilderness beyond. And during that time, they shoed the horses, so there were charcoal fires and sounds of metal. There was a collection of people. In addition to those 10 or so bewigged gentlemen, they also had servants. There were 2 companies of rangers. A company of rangers was 6 men and 1 officer, so that's 14 more individuals who were probably a lot different than those gentlemen, all converging on this one little small place. And all the population of that little fort probably doubled in those 5 days. In addition, there was one more site of Meherrin Indians who came along on the expedition as guides. So you had all these cultures sort of converging on this small fort in 1716 at the end of August. Those 5 days of preparation, I think, are very sort of evocative of the whole frontier experience. The frontier is really the edge of English settlement, and that edge puts cultures in contact with each other. And so it's kind of fun here to be here at Germanna at that space and think about what those sounds and smells were, and to have the horses standing around next to us sort of helps us sort of maybe get a little closer, reimagining what that must have been like. On August 29th, the expedition set out and left the Germanna fort at that point, and I'm sure it got very quiet. If I were a small one of the children, either a young German boy or a young German girl, what must that experience have been like to see those people coming out of the woods? Was that kind of a scary sight? The different languages, the different practices, the different smells, all those sorts of things. Was that scary? Or was it exciting, kind of like the circus just came to town? So I'm thrilled that we have this chance to sort of be here today to sort of commemorate that experience 300 years ago.
We met 3 adorable young girls who took the opportunity to join us a couple of different times to make this history lesson one they'll never forget. Anna, Lindsay, and Claire learned firsthand about the Governor's Ride, and our group was thrilled to have brought history to life for these girls and so many who joined to witness our group ride.
When Best of America by Horseback returns, Tom and his riders will begin their journey to the mountains, celebrating the 300th anniversary of the ride of the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe.
Back at the event venue, East Fork Stables. Have you ever been to Racking on the Edge? The Highlands, in the dream business, air-conditioned ridge-top horse trails, out your back door, Tennessee, 4 beautiful seasons, a short, often warm winter, no state income tax, low property taxes, the Highlands or White Oak. Enough said. Thanks.
Tom and Kristen are leading a ride retracing the little-known but important historical expedition by Alexander Spotswood for the purpose of the expansion of the British colonies in 1716. A detailed accounting of the ride exists today in the diaries of John Fontaine, a participant in the original expedition. He talks of the group being well stocked with provisions, which included an abundant amount and variety of alcohol, which they used quite often to toast various parties or events. Staying true to the diary, our kickoff included many toasts, only using sparkling cider in place of the many alcoholic beverages used by Spotswood's party.
Now fill your flagons to the brim, and let no hand be sparing. Let's pledge, my lads, arouse to him, whose banner we are bearing. Yon vale we claim in George's name, our fealty declaring. Undubbed by king, yet knights are we, to sacred trust beholden, and our insignia shall be a tiny horseshoe golden. May those who climb to heights sublime in honor's arms be folded. Hear, hear.
The ride led out on the original path through the woods along the river that is known today as the Rapidan River. The trail is part of Germanna's Segan Forest. Spotswood had both the pack horses and riding horses shod with iron for the journey over the mountains. Up until this time, Virginians had ridden their horses unshod because there was little domestic iron and the Tidewater area had gentle sandy terrain. The governor wanted to make the point that iron was not only necessary for crossing the mountains, but that it was essential for settlers who would eventually tame the wilderness beyond. Our riders followed the river on Germanna's trails as far as they could, then continued as close to the river as possible along Horseshoe Bend Road. This road parallels the river through fertile farmland with nice views of their destination, the Blue Ridge Mountains and beyond. On the second day of our ride, the group met up with longtime friend Billy Hill, his daughter, and a friend from England.
Decades ago, there was a recreation of part of the ride. My close friend Billy Hill's father, Roland Hill III, rode on that ride. It was meaningful to Billy to join us on the ride with his daughter Sally Hill Outen and her friend Andrea Ridley.
So this was an account I found of the expedition, and I was just reading it to try and get us in the mood today. Aroused by the morning trumpet, they proceeded westward, each day being diversified by the incidents and adventures of exploration. Some of the party encountered hornets, others were thrown from their horses, others killed rattlesnakes. And on the 5th day of September, 1716, a clear day, at about 1 o'clock, he and his party, after a toilsome ascent, reached the top of the mountain.
Our longtime friend Shirley Fishback of Madison County, Virginia, was also on that ride decades ago with Roland Hill.
Other riders in our group included Paul Fox and Robin Yeager from West Virginia. Paul's mule Doc was the only mule on our ride, and he drew much attention from the press and visitors. Sandy and Wayne Gifford, who celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary on Tom's Mexico to Canada ride, came from Michigan. Jane Yarborough rode with us, as well as Kathy Gosha, who rode representing the National Society, Daughters of the American Colonists. The Museum of Culpeper History hosted a picnic at Tom's farm. Attendees had a chance to ask interpretive historians Dan McMahon, portraying George Mason III, and Dennis Loba, portraying Governor Spotswood, about their expedition to the Blue Ridge. John Fontaine's diary gives daily accountings during the expedition. He often described their path as being blocked by thickets that gave them a great deal of trouble tearing through their baggage and clothing, as well as their saddles and holsters. Some days they only made it 4 to 6 miles. They hunted deer and bear along the way or fished the rivers to feed their men. They endured rattlesnake bites to horses, bear attacks on their dogs and men, as well as sickness. The diary also talks of seeing tracks of elk and buffalo, species that have long since disappeared from this area. They drank heartily in the evenings and often got a late start in the mornings. Keeping with the spirit of the expedition, our group visited Prince Michel Winery to see what kind of wine may have been on the original expedition of 1716.
Colonial days, the grapes that were grown were mainly the local grapes, the native grapes. You still find those types of grapes growing out in the woods. As far as what the aristocracy was drinking, it was mostly coming from France.
When you travel through Virginia, or anywhere really, there are wineries that have popped up everywhere like mushrooms. But this one has been here for a long time. This one's the recognized, established winery. What is it that's so special that makes this winery so enduring?
It's just simply been a matter of working really hard at it. It's a tough business to be in. It's agriculture, and trying to grow European grapes in a very hot, humid climate is not always the easiest thing to do. In the end, it's a product that's going to be tasted, so it has to taste good. So while we do a lot of scientific analysis, we have a lab here on site, the very final determination of what goes in the bottle is still based on taste. sometimes it can be 3 to 4 years between the time that we pick it and it goes to the bottle. So you have to love it.
You're proud of the process and the science and the making of the wines. That sets you a notch above everybody else, I think.
When we do our guided tours down on the floor, they get more detailed and you get to learn the whole process, where I think a lot of wineries are quicker to go through that. And so I think that when our guests come through, they really get to know Prince Michel.
In the heart of wine country of the East in Virginia, in my opinion, there's no finer place to come and visit. I don't know if they can catch you when they're here, but you've got to stop by on Route 29 between Thomas Jefferson's Charlottesville and George Washington's Mount Vernon. It's a great place to visit. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
We know who made that hitch. We know who cut the steel, who milled the ball, and who welded the seams. We know who tested, measured, and checked. We even know who thought the whole thing up. We're B&W, and we know your hitch. Because we don't make them halfway around the world. We make them all right here. B&W. Trusted.
Hello, I'm Gary Stites. I am the #1 dealer for Lakota trailers nationwide. Please stop in and see our new facility. Our new facility has a very large display area where we will have up to a dozen trailers inside the building, a very large service center where we can service all your needs. We can take care of your horses as well as your trailer and show you new trailers also. Please stop in and see us on Interstate 71 south of Columbus, Ohio.
Tom and Kristen are celebrating the 300th anniversary of the ride of Governor Alexander Spotswood and his Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. One of the stops along the ride was the Hebron Lutheran Church, the oldest church in continuous use as a Lutheran church in the United States. It was built by German descendants of the original Fort Germana colony. Tom Seay's ancestor, Michael Holt, played an integral part in the establishment of the church. Pastor Patty Covington greeted the riders with lunch and a tour of the church, which included a look at the Tannenberg organ, one of only 9 still in existence today.
Our riders heard the original pipe organ that was brought from Philadelphia by ox cart, which is still used in the church today.
It is in nearly original condition. The keys are reverse colored and are made of ebony and ivory in a short key bed.
I was honored to get to play during our visit.
Docent Judy Ann Frey gave a talk on the history of the church before the riders continued on their journey to the top of the mountains. The expedition had to continue following rivers and branches for an adequate supply of water for the horses and men. Several times they had to backtrack following a different stream for a better route. As they rode higher into the mountains, the river became narrow and was full of large rocks and boulders. Rushing water over the rocks created small waterfalls where riders could take refreshing dips and soak their aching bodies. Pools of water were filled with native trout. The expedition pushed on until they reached the highest summits, naming them for King George and Alexander Spotswood, carving their names in large stones. They continued down the other side of the mountains into what is now known as the Shenandoah Valley. When they came upon a large river, now known as the Shenandoah River, they drank several toasts and fired volleys with their muskets after each toast. Spotswood buried a wine bottle with a paper claiming this and all lands to the west for the King of England, and thus established a vital route through the mountains for western expansion. Our riders were greeted at the top of the mountain by followers of the ride, the press, and by the National Society, Daughters of the American Colonists, who helped organize the ceremony at the summit of the mountain. Over 100 people were in attendance. Mr. Andy Jackson, Master of Ceremonies, introduced the distinguished guests, including 3 members of the Virginia House of Delegates, the Honorable Stephen Landis, the Honorable Bobby Orrick, who gave a brief history of the ride, and the Honorable Nick Freitas, who read the joint resolution passed by the Senate commending the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe Expedition.
Tom, you had created years ago with the Historical Society for your mother a golden horseshoe that was an exact replica from the diary descriptions of the horseshoe pin that Governor Spotswood had gifted to each of the riders as he proclaimed them the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. We created a horseshoe pin to gift to our riders and in our own very special way knighted them as our own Knights of the Golden Horseshoe.
He presented them to each of his riders, distinguished guests, and several ancestors of participants of the original expedition. Of course, the ending celebration included many toasts by the distinguished guests. You can see more on the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe Expedition and the history of their Germanna settlements at the Germanna Foundation Visitor Center in Locust Grove, Virginia, or at the Museum of Culpeper History in Culpeper, Virginia, or on their website, culpepermuseum.com.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode of Best of America by Horseback. I'd like for you to join us on future rides, and here's how you can do it.
You can visit our website, bestofamericabyhorseback.com, click on rides and events, and you can see all the places where you can join us coming up this year and next.
Consider riding with us. We'll see you next week.